Hello and welcome. Welcome everyone to the second of 4 events in the Photography is ... series. For these events, Foam Photography Museum Amsterdam has joined forces with the HUM, an Amsterdam-based platform and laboratory focused on internet and digital culture, to explore how the internet has reshaped photography. My name is Winke Wiegersma. I work at Foam as a curator for our digital platform, Foam Explore, where we curate a wide selection of exciting and interactive content.
And I'm Margarita Osipian. I'm part of the HUM, focusing mainly on programming and research. I'm really happy to also welcome you onto our live stream tonight. Of course, you'll be seeing me and Vinka and our guests, but we couldn't do this event without some people who are hiding out behind the scenes. Our technician Marco is running the live stream, and our chat moderator Thomas is in the chat with all of you. He'll be sharing links throughout the program and also bringing all of your questions to us. So this is just a little reminder that as questions come up, please feel free to share them in the chat, and they'll be sent over so we can bring them into the conversations that we'll be having. And of course, my colleague Lillian from the HUM, who is not on stage with us tonight, but she also helped develop the program together with me and Vinka. And for those of you who haven't been on our live stream platform before, this is a platform that we built together with the HUM at the start of the pandemic. I just wanted to share like a few little tips of how to use it. There's a chat on the right side of the screen. That's where you can chat to other guests and send your questions. You can also respond to speakers or just share some of your emotions with a little emotes tab. There's this little yellow tab at the bottom of the screen. And we also added a new feature, which is that you can watch the live stream with different video resolutions. There's a really low res option where you get a screenshot every 15 seconds. There's an audio-only mode and a text-only mode in order to allow people with different bandwidths and access to internet to also be able to watch the live stream. And you can also turn on captions by pressing the 3 little dots at the bottom of the screen and select the captions there. And one final little thing is that you might have noticed as you watch that all the data that is being sent and received is actually being calculated at the top right of the screen, just to give you a little feeling of some of the digital resources that are being used as the live stream continues. So now, with all those practical details out of the way, let's get back into tonight's event. So this series departs from the question, what even is photography nowadays? In a rapidly changing context, it seems futile to want to pin the photographic medium down to one definition. Instead, what photography is, we collectively want to explore the different possible endings to this sentence. This is something which we'll actually be doing together at the end of the event in order to better understand the multitude of manifestations of this medium and to speculate what might come next in a myriad of possible futures. In the coming hour, we have an exciting selection of speakers lined up for you. Before we dive into the conversations, we're going to quickly bring you up to speed on the ideas and inspiration behind this event series.
So as you know, this time we finish our sentence, photography is ... with the term hoarding. For those who were present last event, we reflected actually on the first image to ever appear on the internet, only 32 years ago. By 2024, an estimated of 1.94 trillion photos will be taken worldwide, with 5.3 billion photos captured on a daily basis, or over 61,000 per second. With approximately 14.3 trillion photos in existence and 14 billion images shared daily on social media, lots of numbers, it seems like hoarding massive amounts of visual material has become ingrained into our lives. Due to the current technological simplicity of capturing, storing, and retrieving images, we often forget that behind the immaterial metaphors of the cloud are real physical technologies. The storage of these vast amounts of data requires extensive energy and infrastructures, contributing to carbon emissions and actually shifting power structures, while we save every moment from our phones into the cloud.
And yet this abundance of digital imagery also serves a vital social purpose. Photographs have become powerful tools for social justice, serving as a witness of human rights abuses, socio-political uprisings, and environmental crises. Activists and citizen journalists wield their cameras to document injustices and share vital information online. Often they're putting their safety on the line in the process. This act of saving and sharing these images in the face of censorship or erasures amplifies voices and preserves important narratives that might otherwise be silenced.
And this raises pressing questions, like what is the value of a single photograph in a flood of digital images? What are the environmental, political, and societal implications of this accumulation of visual data? How will we store and preserve these large quantities, and who controls this? The abundance and continuous presence of images that we're faced with has somehow normalized over the years. It not only has a profound impact on how we perceive the world around us, but arguably also largely shaped how artists are working with the photographic medium nowadays. From scraping large image data sets to using digital found footage for their practice, a wide array of practices have opened up, and some of which we will zoom into tonight.
And in light of shadow banning on online platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as censorship of content and even permanent banning of creators online who share documentation of state violence, it's important for us to think about the value of the single image, particularly the networked image, the image that circulates. Through the lens of the photograph as witness, the ways that the internet has reshaped photography are abundant. Due to the proliferation of smartphone photographs, documentation of police brutality, harassment, and state violence has increased, leading to large-scale political movements and uprisings. For example, Palestinian poet Moussa Abu Toha, who fled Gaza with his family in December of 2023, constantly shares images and videos of the killing and terror inflicted by the state of Israel on the people of Gaza. He shares them on Instagram and on Telegram, urging people to screenshot them and save them before they get taken down. In this way, the saving and archiving of images, we can see it also as another kind of hoarding by a collective group of people, becomes a kind of distributed archive of genocidal violence. The saving of images becomes, we could argue, a way to counteract online censorship by large companies like Meta.
Taking a moment to reflect back, one could say that actually the concepts of collecting and saving have historically been an integral part of the photographic medium, stored as witnesses of events, as proofs of observations, or as tokens of cherished memories. Photography proved useful for documenting the world around us for numerous purposes, from connecting socially through very early on in the medium, the so-called cartes de visite, which were small-sized portraits that people shared with their loved ones that gained enormous popularity as a sort of social media avant la lettre, you could say, to photography fueling the very harmful and impactful imperial machine, or even scientific effort, capturing, extracting knowledge, visually reinforcing certain dominant narratives. However, within the context of the internet and under the influence of technological developments, collecting and preserving photographic images has changed tremendously. Not just in its formats, from photographic prints on glass or paper carriers now stored in massive data centers in JPEG, PNG, or TIFF files, coded, metadated, and encrypted, but also its creators, as online platforms exist and thrive on, for example, user-generated content, surveillance technologies that are hoarding images 24/7, or even machines that spam our networks with so-called AI slop, a term that was relatively recently coined referring to low-quality visual spam created by AI that increasingly clogs the web and has actually been signaled that is accumulating at such a rapid speed that it's very hard for us to keep up. We won't take the stage for much longer. Within this overwhelmingly abundant and changing landscape, I'll introduce the first of our guest speakers who help us navigate through, hopefully tonight. Anouk Kruithof is a transdisciplinary visual artist whose practice engages with social themes and their relation to digital visual culture, drawing on the surplus of online images and their impact on human connectivity, mental health, and geopolitical awareness. Her work encompasses various media, including photography, sculpture, collage, video and animation, artist books, installations, websites, text, performance, and social community-based projects. Her work has been widely recognized and exhibited internationally at a variety of renowned institutions, as well as included in many collections, among which Foam's own collection. Anouk also has a long-standing history with Foam. Selected as a Foam talent in 2009, Anouk subsequently opened a big solo exhibition as part of Foam's Next Level series in 2017 called Aguas. Anouk, I want to welcome you to the stage, and I'll hand over the digital mic now to you. Thanks.
Hello, hi. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. So that was an introduction already. Yeah, I think it's most important to start talking about this, the change of the medium somehow, because I'm very grateful that I worked 21 years now. In 2003, I graduated, and I really come from I have the background of learning to develop black and white film and even to print color prints, and that's even my graduation. So in that sense, in the time that still a photograph being printed or being framed was the way how we would show photography or how we were used to look at photos is my beginning. Whether now, of course, we are almost like being swallowed up by the stream of continuously growing and the abundance of digital imagery online. And I find that, I think that's important to say, because when you come from that time, and I've been always, photography was my main medium, but I've also very, very critical about it, actually, because I think when you work with it, you have to question it as well. And along in these 21 years, the medium has changed so much. So my practice and my own behavior and relationship with it too. So I think in 2006, I started really to question the boundaries of the medium and stretched the photographic medium into the three-dimensional world. I started to make photo sculptures and use photography more in spatial installations. But later than that, I think also with the rise of looking looking at the world through our screen, that became maybe, 12, 15 years ago, part of our existence, right? How you would observe the world, rather the physical world, but the one online presented, and the way, that the internet became the window to see the world. And with that fact, of course, the online images grew, and I think it also created some kind of numbness, some questions towards the belief of photography and the way you how they actually can tell something if they are in this type of abundance. Is it not that they, with the growth of it, are actually alienating us from a certain topic? And that question somehow is, let's go to look at some photo sculptures I made in 2021, where I was really I was drawn by is this thousands of web photos about climate change or certain very concerning topics actually you could see, but what do we learn from it? So I started to collect all kind of images in big amounts. For example, the ocean plastics, how the problem of the plastics of the ocean is represented by digital images on the internet. And I decided that I wanted to, I make art, so I don't just, I consume and use the internet, but at the same time for me to bridge the gap in how we somehow have to have to be alarmed what this digital stream means, I thought it was interesting to bring it back to the physical world by making sculptures. And what I did is I collected photographic images per team. And from it was in the time of pandemic that I collected a lot of boxes from electronic devices, so the very polluting material polystyrene. And from that, I started to make sculptures which have a bit amorphous shapes, but they have some partly human shapes, but very disformed and dysfunctional. And I started to create these sculptures out of this recycled polystyrene boxes. And to me, it's very much showing the dysfunctioning of us humans somehow with this one leg. And I began to make these photographic skins, maybe you can call it, like the one before the last straw is built from all this imagery of ocean plastics that's found online. But the other one, which we see here, is called Another Universe, and it's pictures depicting the and so that is somehow a way for me to deal with this maybe drowning in this photographic image. This also is fascinating. I think how photos of photosynthesis have to learn you something at the same time when you look at it and you have to zoom into this sculptures. This skin becomes actually one part where everything is connected, and you wonder if the information gets dissolved, or it raises new questions also. With the one with the oceans and the sea, I would like to show Silent Thermal, it's called, whether all the images of the surface of the different oceans and the different rivers, I mean thousands and thousands of them, they become kind of one in this sculptural movement. And they also say something, of course, about this flow, and as well as about connectivity. And so I want to go to some other works which relate to this work, but they are a bit different. It's already goes really fast. The light at the end of the tunnel has been turned off. It's a diptych collage actually, and together with a lot of assistants, also based on different places in the world, we started to collect. It was between 2017 and 2022. Images of self-made protest signs, so photos of protests throughout the world about social injustice and climate change and migration, COVID, and we started to collect or take out actually the self-made protest signs. I don't know if you can see it on some very small imagery like this. Maybe this is a bit better for looking at it. And I find it very fascinating, of course, that this protest throughout the world, I feel like almost every week there is one, and over the internet, of course, you can witness it, and you can learn a lot what's going on in all these different places in the world. Some topics are being fought, and it's on different places at the same time. And and also the creativity that comes with everyone, every single individual making these signs and taking this act to go out there. I really wanted to make some dedication to all these signs. So thousands of them we cut out, and we put them here together in one collage. And the back of this imagery, you see, it has the shape of a fist up and one down, but you also see the masses of here more in white, and in the other part is more black. I think it's too hard to see because these works are really big. So you have to somehow really get closer to see, all this curiosity, and also the different protests and the different slogans next to each other, they also show, I feel, it was very painful of what actually still has to be changed and how much frustration there is and how much topics have to be fought. And in this work, you zoom out, like you stand 7 meters away, it gives a very powerful sign. But when you come closer, you also see where all the contrast and the conflict somehow comes from, because you see all these different slogans working with each other. And yeah, for me, I mean, to examine certain topics or to also be fascinated by the ability to know more about the world over images on the internet. Actually, this is a certain way to bring it out in the physical world and to use it as art. That's something there was an idea where I had to talk about, but as my time is already over, I somehow had also 2 projects of others that I wanted to show. And not my own work. One is an app that's made by Andres Galliano, a new friend. He lives in Berlin. And together with scientists, he made an app called Nephogram, which actually calculates how many grams of CO2 are emitted by you as a user sharing a photo. So you can put the app for free on your phone, and you can you have to say which social media platforms you use, as well how many followers you have, and then it calculates, when you start to share one photo, it calculates the amount of gram of CO2 that is emitted when you start to share on Instagram or only on WhatsApp. And it makes you aware about, indeed, what Winke also talks about. It makes you just conscious about your environmental impact by sharing digital images. And yeah, it is somehow also a big paradox, because of course, first you think showing digital imagery has a lesser negative impact on the environment, but at the same time, that's of course we know that's not really true. And yeah, I think this is an interesting artistic project. It creates some awareness. I don't know if you always would use it, but it is somehow handy to make yourself a bit more conscious about the implications of sharing imagery. And then at the same time, you also have a new magazine that is just out, number 1, Resolution it's called, by editor Laurens Otto. It's a Belgian guy. And the first magazine is called Hot Pictures. And it exactly deals with what I just told you about, like for example, what your carbon footprint will be when the production and the sharing of a certain image that analyzes the environmental destruction or climate change, but by sharing and by how many times it gets shared, downloaded, looked at, and circulated, you're actually more energy gets used. So you do something on the contrary by what you want to tell with these images. And I think, there is no resolution for it, I would say, but this magazine is deeper, analyzes this paradox deeper. So yeah, that's maybe something also for you to look into and to have a look at. And that's my 10, 12 minutes are already over. So I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, Anouk. For those of you who are watching, we'll bring Anouk back at the end for the conversation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share them for that part of the program. So Anouk also touched on this, but the topic we're dealing with tonight brings up questions about who preserves what and where. The pivotal role of the archive has been acknowledged in its physical shape, yet how does this work in a digital realm where social media sites and apps running on user-generated images function as living archives controlled by a monopoly of tech companies? So this brings us to our second speaker, Oscar Talbot. Oscar's an academic working on abolition and ecology, and he's been helping the Netherlands Student Intifada Archive project. This archive preserves the student uprising, documents police violence, shapes the narrative, and learns for future protest. Tonight, Oscar is going to guide us to the back end of this archive, which is a mainly visual archive, in order to emphasize the importance of preserving memory. Welcome, Oscar. Oh, wait, I don't hear you. Can you try again? Give us one second.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now you're good. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Wait.
Can you hear me?
Something? Yes.
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, you can hear me? You can see my presentation as well? Okay. I'm not quite sure what the problem is here because...
Oh, sorry, give us a second,
can you turn this
everyone.
better, maybe? Is this... Can you hear me?
Yes,
and can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, then I might just crack on then.
Yeah, I think without video is better, then we can hear you just fine. That's no problem.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I'm a philosopher PhD at the University of Amsterdam, and I was invited to work with the Netherlands Student Intifada Archive, which is an autonomous group of civil society people who are working to document police violence and state violence during the Netherlands student uprisings. And just as a trigger warning, of course, this presentation includes nothing that dramatic or graphic, but images of police violence from the from the start. So you can see here image of a policeman hitting someone in the back, and these are kind of typical. This is typical of some of the images that people have taken, and I think what is so powerful about these images and this tradition of cop watch is that it really cuts through the police narrative, which is always that they are following the rules, obeying the law, and that they are kind of using a minimal amount of force to protect public safety. Whereas I think just this one image really demonstrates this is completely farcical. They are clearly attacking people who are moving away, hitting them on the back with a full strike. You can see how much force is being used here. And you can also see this imagery of the cop with his big helmet on, attacking someone who is literally running away. And this is fairly typical of some of the images that the archive shows. So just to be clear, I am an academic. I work on the intersections between, amongst other things, state violence and climate breakdown. And I'm interested in the idea of cop watch from a philosophical and activist perspective, but I'm not a member of the archive per se. The archive consists of 400 submissions, maybe a few more now, videos, photos, and written testimony from a wide group of people, including students, activists, and members of the public, as well as street medics and other people who are kind of more structurally involved in protests. You can see some of the people who are involved in this coalition. There's the Amsterdam Student Encampment. There's the Workers for Palestine. There's Samidoun, Mokum Cracked, and Ua for Palestine. And you can see here the aims of the archive. And this all comes from the online platform, which you can still submit things to, which is just, if you just type in the Netherlands Student Intifada Archive, then you'll see it. And then you can see kind of some of how this is broken down in the back end. So, this is on the submission platform, actually. You can break it down by submissions according to the city, the location, the time, or by description, by the date, by whether there's kind of consent given. And there's a whole host of categories, which I think is really funny. A lot of these are generated by the people who are submitting media. So some of them are really confusing. You can see there's like two pigs. I know that there were problems trying to actually categorize things because so many things were just like emoji of a pig, and then these are not necessarily the same thing. So all these kind of interesting problems that emerged during the archival process. And then this is a kind of quick glimpse of the background. You can see here that there's everything has a submission number, a time and a date, a location, a kind of more granular location, broad meta categories, and then a description, which is usually generated by the user, and then a few more bits of information. And the archive has been quite instrumental, from what I understand, in a number of different positive outcomes. And I think it's been really productive, which is quite interesting to see. So a number of legal cases have been supported, as well as official complaints against the police. Officially, it is a kind of abolitionist project. So there's kind of general skepticism towards the traditional state processes for justice. But I think there's a general feeling that it's helpful to support people who are making that step to file an official complaint. They've taken part in numerous media projects and artistic projects, as well as, for example, helping other activist groups or artists who are interested in working with the archive in some way. And of course, with me as an academic. And they've also collaborated, and I also worked on this, on a program from VPRO, which was aired as part of Mediologica Argos on Saturday. And this involved some of the methodologies from forensic architecture. And we had a really kind of map things into a render. And this is one of the VPRO and the studio pointer team who they were working with, created this really amazing kind of like a video game. You can go in between these images, and they're time stamped and synchronized. And you can navigate yourself around the terrain where they're shot. And then you can kind of have your own freeform narrative, or there's also a more structured narrative process as well. And here's another image of what can be seen. So again, here's like extreme violence. It's very disturbing to look through these archives, and I think raises questions about what it means to kind of collect these things and who should have access to them, for sure, because it is very troublesome. And then from a more philosophical perspective, some of the things that I was thinking about when working with this archive are questions around consent. So I think cop watch in general, images of police violence, for example, of course, George Floyd and many other people who have been murdered by the state, they kind of create an unhappy problem around consent. They're very complicated from that perspective. And normally what we think of as someone consenting to be in a picture or a video is either impossible because unfortunately the person has been killed, or there's a kind of recognition that maybe there's something larger that we should be looking towards or kind of authorize whether it's acceptable to portray an image. And I think this is something that is really difficult. And I know it's difficult with making the documentary because people who have the video are not necessarily people who are portrayed in it. And then there is this danger to hoarding. It was interesting hearing Anouk talk about environmental impact, because I think there's also another problem that comes with this form of centralization, and it creates a security vulnerability for everyone, really, even if there is this kind of greater good. Of course, then the question of whether it's possible to actually keep the focus on the thing that's being protested on, in this case, a genocide in Gaza and in Palestine and now in Lebanon, when you're portraying images of kind of broadly privileged people in the global north. And of course, this was a kind of concern making the documentary, because we were worried about maintaining the narrative focus on the genocide in Palestine and in Lebanon at the detriment, but it's kind of like portrayed through these images of people in Amsterdam. And then finally, of course, the hoarder at the protest is a kind of uncomfortable character in many ways. I think having been at protests, I'm always very wary of people who are filming, who take pictures. Of course, we're seeing restrictions on wearing face coverings and restrictions towards, from the state, filming police, also including journalists. And I think this raises really significant problems for this kind of project that, are just tricky philosophical problems, I think. And here's a kind of another image that I really love, this more collage-y thing that I think really shows these kind of like interesting conflicts and contradictions at the heart of what's portrayed in the archive, at times joyous and at times deeply painful and violent.
You can go back to Margarita, please.
Yes, thank you. Shall we try to bring Oscar back on with video just to answer a few questions? Let's see how it works. Oscar, can you say something? No, it's still, maybe turn your video off again. Yes. Okay, great. So you'll just see me, but you'll hear Oscar. Is that correct, Marco? Yes, the little empty space next to me is a representation. Yes, I was just wondering if you know where the images in the archive mainly come from. You had mentioned different contributors to the archive, but do you have a sense from the people who manage the archive whether where the images mainly come from and whether they accept all images that are coming in, or are they making a selection based on certain kinds of criteria?
In principle, anything can be submitted. So when I was working through the archive, I saw that at times people had maliciously submitted things. So, for example, images of a bombing in 1992 in Israel, for example, there was clearly a kind of attempt to fill up the archive with images that it wasn't intended to collect in the first place. And I think there wasn't so much of this, so there wasn't really a need for restriction. In general, I think if you look at the videos, you can see on the render that was being made, or some of the other videos, so many people are filming, and a lot of people did submit things. And I think it is really of 400 different. I think it's 400 different people who submitted things, and sometimes one person submitted multiple entries over a couple of days. But I think overwhelmingly, maybe it's like 350 different people. But yeah, it was a really broad group of people, and sometimes you read the description, and it was quite funny that it was just like a neighbor or someone who lived opposite the way, or someone who filmed like live streaming, or tourists, and they would kind of hear about this, and then they would submit something. So it was really a really wide group of people.
Thank you. I'll ask one more question just for the sake of time, and then other ones we can bring in at the end. But you had mentioned, I think, a really interesting point about also some of the security concerns about these sort of image hoarders at protests. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more, if you know, about the technical infrastructure of the archive itself. How is that kept safe and secure?
Yeah, I know some of this, but I'm of course a bit wary about knowing about what exactly to give away. I know that there was consultation from like a really wide variety of experts. Some people who, like, I was surprised would be involved, but for example, there's an activist group who give advice on how to securely store things on the cloud. So now they kind of like have this clever encryption model that I don't understand at all, and there's some sort of like proxy routing through different locations. I think there's a sort of like certain geolocation locks, for example, or like people have to log in at a certain time. it was quite complicated for me to get a login in the first place, and then it's kind of like rescinded sometimes. So it's also quite fragile, I think, and there was a feeling, I think, from the people who were running the archive about what should be preserved, and there were, I know, certain things that were not collected, and one of the narratives that we were very keen to push back against was something that you saw from the Driehoek, and especially from Femke Halsma, the mayor, where she said, well, people were making Molotov cocktails. This happened very early on and is essentially a conspiracy theory. And I think some people felt like this was what was in the archive. And so it was very interesting looking through the archive and seeing actually, like, overwhelmingly, firstly, that didn't happen. So of course there's no video of it. And also in other cases, there's not, people don't video lots of things, and they choose not to submit them. So there is a mediation between people who are uploading and filming and the people who are collecting. But there is also an editorial process on the other side where people said, you know, this is important, but it's just too risky to keep. But the things that were in that category are a very, very small group of things and relatively benign. But it's more this feeling that given there was such intense state violence and state response, that there was just the danger of keeping things was too great.
Thank you so much, Oscar. And we'll bring you back in at the end for the conversation. And now I'll pass over back to Winke.
Yes, thank you, Margarita. Also a kind reminder for anyone who's listening, if any questions arise, please post them in the chat to Thomas and we'll bring them back in the end. I would like to introduce our third and final speaker of tonight. Razan Al-Salah is a Palestinian artist and teacher based in Jogjaga in Montreal, Canada. Her films work with the material aesthetics of appearance and disappearance of indigenous bodies, narratives, and histories in colonial image worlds, often working with so-called sound images. Recently, Razan curated a program of video shorts for the Palestinian Film Festival happening at Film Theater De Uitkijk here in Amsterdam. And in 2023, she also participated as part of a panel for the Small Fowl Media Festival, a hybrid festival aimed at offering alternatives to the high carbon footprint of streaming online media, and actually a partner of the HUM as well. Welcome, Razan. It's a pleasure to have you. Before we stream an excerpt of your video work, Canada Park, which you created in 2019, could you give us a short introduction of what the work is about and what we will see?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Winke. First of all, I just want to situate myself. I'm speaking from Jogjaga, stolen Mohawk territory. I also want to say that I'm a third-generation Palestinian refugee, and so I'm a Palestinian here living on stolen land, and I think part of understanding what is happening today is understanding that what we are seeing in this overflow of images, of horrific images coming from Gaza, is how Israel was founded. So my father and my grandparents were born and lived in Haifa, which is today an occupied city. And, a lot of what I'm going to be talking with you today is about this invisibility and visibility or hypervisibility of violence. So today we can see the genocide happening, but it's important that we know that it's been ongoing with moments of acceleration, namely in 1948 when my family was displaced at gunpoint. Today I can see it happening in Gaza in the form of this hypervisibility. And the question then becomes, between this visibility and invisibility, how are we unable still to stop the genocide a year into it? Another thing that I would like to bring into kind of the conversation before we watch Canada Park is this cusp of visibility and visibility comes also in how I use Google Street View to return to Palestine. So as displaced Palestinians, we are like blocked from returning to our homeland by Israel. And so I use Google Street View, I use these digital images to return to Palestine. But, there's another contradiction there because, this image landscape becomes a moment of encounter with Palestine, but also is an extension of the erasure of Palestine. So the images in their kind of indexicality and their photorealism present that opportunity to return, to trespass, to encounter, but also that is ruptured because it's exactly the indexicality and the realism that hides the massacre, that hides indigenous Palestinian bodies and stories and histories. Finally, before we watch Canada Park, I want to speak to then, in this question around visibility or hypervisibility and invisibility, then what is foregrounded is the mode of production of images, the mode of consumption of images. And this is why it's important to be on this panel and talk about this flow of images, because it really foregrounds the infrastructure and the economy of images, which is so important. In the case of Canada Park, it was really important for me as a Palestinian on stolen land to also understand that that colonization is an economy of scale, that there is a structural relationship between so-called Canada and so-called Israel, and that these infrastructures extend from the way that capital flows between these two settler colonial states, how then also violence flows between these two settler colonial states, and how these images also flow between these two settler colonial states. And so the site of Canada Park, which is a park that was built upon the destruction and massacre of 3 Palestinian villages, the park itself, the destruction of the villages and the park and the building of the park were fundraised for here in Canada and paid for by Canadian Zionists, tax deductible. And this, the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund was rescinded only a few weeks ago here in Canada, but until a few weeks ago, it was tax deductible to build a site like Canada Park on top of the destruction of these 3 Palestinian villages in 1967, and so this is where like the park becomes an extension of, or a border that is an image border or an image wall that hides the massacre. But then the images through which I'm exploring the park, which are user-generated images through Google Street View, are also another extension of that border. And then, so the question becomes, what does film do? What does it mean to stand with one image? What does it mean to reinsert images that have been disappeared of the March of Return to the site? What does it mean to extend time instead of the speed of scrolling? We'll talk about all of these after the film, but these are the 3 considerations I think I'm thinking about today.
Thanks. And with that, I think we should just watch the excerpt. The full video will also be made available to everyone who's listening in. But let's watch an excerpt of Canada Park.
عيني لا ثقب للنور فيها، عين التكسير تقتفي الأثر خارج مسرح الآثار، خارج مدينة الشجر. All right. So we've just watched an excerpt of your video, and you already mentioned, of course, the user-generated images. This work departs from Google Maps, a well-known tool, of course. It's a software that actually allows anyone to upload visual content to certain geolocations, populating a spot with different perspective or user content representing actually a physical three-dimensional space into the digital, yet I would say in a way also adding a fourth dimension of time as contributions grow over time. And I remember in our conversations, you mentioned that this particular work departed from over 40,000 images. Can you elaborate a bit on that and how that accumulation of images played a role in this project?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, in the spirit of understanding images as an extension of material structures, first of all, I would like to think about public parks, right? So this structure, which is a green zone that is used for land theft here in Canada, as well as in Israel at this site, Canada Park, is also defines what public is. So yes, it is a public park, but who is the public is the question. The public becomes restricted to settlers who have access to this colonial border that then also disappears displaces and the indigenous Palestinian population, and in kind of this extending or expanding our understanding of what is indigenous, even these trees that are planted on top of the massacre, on top of the destruction of these 3 villages, are chosen for aesthetic reasons, because they are pine trees and they look European, they make the landscape more European, they green the desert being savage and green being civilized, right? So there's this aesthetic consideration, but also, again, it has a more material infrastructural consequences on the indigenous plants under it, because the pines are so tall that they create this shadow that creates another form of death, right? Another area of death for all the indigenous wild plants under the pines. So just understanding kind of the levels of erasure and greenwashing that is happening, I think, is important. So how is that extended in the digital realm? We kind of land in this geolocation now inside Google Street View, and we see that there are 40,000 images. This excess of user-generated images kind of reflects, or is a manifestation of this ability to roam this land, but this kind of, again, reminds us that these 40,000 images is kind of a reoccupation of the land. It kind of reinforces that who has access to this land. Finally, understanding how these digital platforms are created, right? And how they are used. I guess we'll talk about how they are created in just a bit, but let me talk about how they are used in the sense that they turn places into into locations to be consumed, right? So we produce these 40,000 images to kind of reinforce this who has access to the land, but also we break with this idea that these places are turned into touristic sites, right? Into biblical sites. They're turned into real estate. So the way that these platforms function also abstract place into something that we consume, something that is also monetized and is part of capital. In terms of what the film does, I mean, you can watch the film, but I think I counter all of these forces, all of these structures in a few ways. One, by reinserting images of the marches of return. Every year, the people of Amwas, Yalo, and Bet Nuba attempt to trespass physically with their bodies, and of course are met with military violence, military state violence, Israeli state violence. And so do we see these images online? In those 40,000 images, we don't, right? So I reinsert them in the film, but I also reinsert them on the geolocation itself, and you can do so as well. And I'll show you just in a bit how you can do that. But also, I think what film does is it extends, right? So film is a medium of time, and so it really allows us to move with a different speed, and the speed of consumption. Consumption depends on speed, and abstraction depends on speed. And I think film allows us to stay with the image, stay with the place, stay with these different counter narratives. I'll stop there.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And continuing on this idea of the user-generated imagery, which obviously is a big source of the accumulation of imagery that we now see online. Within the landscape of photography, how do you view the role and importance of user-generated images? And maybe already
also looking at time, combining it a bit with your project that you're already hinted at, No Man's
Sure.
Lands. Maybe we can combine that. How this idea of user-generated content can confirm, but also counter oppressive narratives or dominant narratives.
Okay, so I'm sharing now my project No Man's Land, which I think is a remediation of Canada Park into print media. So I was commissioned to make this work along with Dana Qaddah, who was the curator that wrote a text that you can find online that gives more context on Canada Park and No Man's Land. But to return here to the actual work, again, it really questions the indexicality of images and what is present and what is absent. So a lot of these images, not a lot of them, all of them are user-generated images and then I absent the faces here in a way to kind of again signal who has access to being there, to taking these images, to uploading these images, and who's absented, who's displaced, whose bodies are disappeared. Again, in this example, I also signal to this fascist greenwashed way of planting or creating this green zone, creating this kind of city of trees that is built upon the destruction of Palestinian villages. And we can see kind of the grid of trees, but also, the Zionist narrative is always that the Palestinian resistance is using Palestinians as human shields. When we look at sites like Canada Park, we notice that there are military infrastructures inside parks, nearby parks, and this is the truth of Israel. And I wanted also to signal that in the work. So the greenwashing really has so many layers that are beyond the image, and again beyond kind of in the excess of images you might not notice this image, but I wanted to sit with that, right, and highlight it. Oops, sorry. Here we go.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead, Vinka.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering how you then in No Man's Land also use this collection of images to intervene, because that's also something you already highlighted in, and I think it's a very powerful part of the project where we spoke about this in preparation, this idea of sort of using the abundance of imagery as a form of resistance, as sort of a spamming of a system. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that.
So yes, let's collectively. I'm inviting audiences to spam the system with and reinsert these images of the marches of return. So if you you can either scan this QR code here, or you can go to my website razanasalah.com, No Man's Land. We will include all of this in the resources list that you're collecting. Thank you so much for that. So here you can actually download the images of the March of Return, and it will take you to a drive where you can download these images and re-upload them to the geolocation, kind of as a collective way to reinsert. Because I can't do this alone. I'm trying, but this requires collective action. Finally, I just wanted to kind of also focus on print media specifically, because this was printed in a physical magazine. And so I thought about how can we kind of bring forward kind of a critical literacy of images And so I created this kind of image as strata of like the village that was destroyed. This is Amwas, pre-1967, then the complete erasure of Amwas, and finally the city of trees that was built upon this erasure, and kind of signaling why I use white squares then to kind of signal or reappear the ghosts of those who were killed and absented and displaced. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I think it's particularly beautiful to end on this image because it again speaks to this fourth dimension, which is included within the infrastructure of a platform like Google Maps, as I said earlier, where user contributions evolve over time, and actually you can go back in time and see a place change. So I think that this image particularly really speaks to that transition and how these geolocations change and how impactful images are in the shaping of that. Looking at
If
the
only
time,
Google, if only Google would use that tool to scrub through, we have we call it colonial capture. It works also in time, right? Like suddenly everything started in October 7th, right? That's colonial time. That's colonial capture. We need to scrub through and see an ongoing genocide for a century now.
Absolutely. Thanks for having this conversation with me. There's many more questions I would like to ask, but I'm gonna open up the floor to the rest of the speakers as well. Also, thanks for your call to action. I think let's use image hoarding as forms of resistance. I think that's a good conclusion of our talk. I'm handing over now to Margarita, who will invite all of you back to the floor to conclude with a bunch of questions.
Thank you, Linka. Thanks, everyone. So we're running a little bit later, but let's take a few minutes also to have a discussion between all of us. There was actually one question that came in via the chat, which was specifically for Oscar. It was from Edja, who asked, do you know if the archive is also being used by the police?
I hope you can hear me. Yeah, the archive is not being used by the police and never would be, that we know of course. I think one of the tensions that the archivists felt, especially sharing it with me and with state-funded media or any form of journalism, is that there is no such thing as security, really, like bulletproof security or 100% security. And I think there was also a general recognition that the images that are taken and saved in our phones and shared through Instagram have already been seen or can be seen. And so there was this kind of attempt at pragmatism from the people running the archive to say it's a managed risk to collect these things, to make them available to trusted people. There is a risk in centralization, but to pretend that these images can be viewed in any other way is untrue. And I think if you think about even the Snowden leaks and what was shown to be capable and routine in terms of the everyday surveillance of supposedly private networks of communication between citizens, I think that's a reasonable risk assessment. But of course, the police is slightly different from the security services in the state. But I know that there were talks within the archive from day one about what would happen if they had a police request or some sort of legal threat. And I know they would never do this, of course.
Thank you, Oscar. It's good also to know the sort of limitation also and how maybe not the actors that we want use these images. I had a question for Anouk. You had mentioned in your presentation about this numbness when it comes to viewing things through a screen. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if it's numbness about viewing through a screen, but maybe more the abundance of something, or I feel like the getting lost, and also of course it loses, I mean, captions, informations. Maybe indeed if you go on sharing, splitting, copying, and the flow of images, the source gets the further away, I would say, and the way the reuse of images is done over the internet can also be, has also some kind of dangerous aspect about it, because it loses the integrity and the captions, I think, and this numbness. I mean, the numbness is maybe more about the amount, but I think the danger is also something to take in consideration if we talk about this hoarding and also the others with using archives and the internet. There is a lot of implications about that too. We have to be conscious about. And it's also it's dystopic and utopic at the same time, I would say, the flow of images and how we read them and who reads them also and uses them. So this is maybe a whole other conversation, but it's definitely related to this topic. You can go in many tentacles with this. As we know, we need it. It's Razan said it also. It's highly important. At the same time, the seductiveness or the maybe transformedness, the fakeness, all of these dangerous aspects are also part of this flow and the way we consume them and use this actually as information for mostly.
Thank you, Anouk. Yeah, I think that's that this tension is really important, and that actually brings me to another question that I had, which Razan kind of touched on before we watched Canada Park. This relationship between visibility and invisibility. As many of us have seen, Israel's genocide on the people in Gaza has been labeled by some as the world's first live-streamed genocide. And if you compare this to the Holocaust, for example, where there were like 4 blurry photographs that were smuggled out of Auschwitz, and a few, very few photographs that came in out of the Auschwitz album, the scale of imagery and video evidence being shared in real time is staggering. And yet, it's already been more than a year, and it feels like this level of evidence does very little to stop the violence. Razan, you also touched on that briefly as well. And I was just thinking about, maybe in this context, what is the power of the accumulation of images? And is there another power that is even more strong than that? Maybe you can touch on that through your own perspective.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I didn't talk about the film does as well is introduce movement and sound, right? Which are both kind of embodied and counter this kind of abstraction which comes with speed of consumption, which comes with kind of algorithmic selectivity and all of that. That being said, I think we are all questioning why we would want to produce any other image after the images that are coming from Gaza. And I think, I have a couple of chapters that kind of I think about when I'm thinking of images of violence and what can and cannot be done through these images. One is just understanding the settler colonial framework and the relationship between the colonized and the colonizer by Frantz Fanon on violence. I mean, that's a must to just read before you exit this door and kind of face the immense normalization that is happening in North America, on Turtle Island, but in the world in general. And the second thing that is more pertinent to images, I think, is John Berger's photographs of agony. I mean, he really puts his finger on it, like what does it mean to see or not to see the war on Vietnam? Also reminds us of this genocide being American as much as it is Israeli. This is number one. Number two, it really like speaks to what do we do with these images, because they do capture us. Just like the image is captured, that moment is captured, we are captured by it. I mean, people who are not captured by it, maybe we don't want to talk to them, but the people who are captured by the image, like what do you do with this kind of feeling of inaction or helplessness? And he really speaks to kind of like the different reactions. One is helplessness, one is kind of sending money, donating. But the third one, and the most important one, is that encounter with the violence itself is an encounter with the violence in our settler colonial states, right? This is what happened to the Mohawks. This is what happened to the Palestinians in 1948. So the question then becomes, are we going to face this violence in how we act here and how we like face our lack of freedom, lack of democracy, inability to action our overwhelming kind of public opinion against this genocide. So I'll send those to you as well to add to the list of resources. I think it would be important.
Thank you so much, Razan, also for that very powerful statement. I think, like Vinka had said, we could kind of go on for a really long time discussing these kinds of topics. And like Anouk had mentioned, there's so many sort of tentacles and entanglements between these things. But since we're running a little bit late already, I'm going to wrap things up. So we've come now to the end of this second Photography Is event. Just really want to thank our wonderful speakers who've really shared the important work that they're doing. Anouk Krauthoff, Oscar Talbot, and Razan Al-Salah. You really brought a lot of valuable insights and also a lot of resources for our audience as well. Let's give them a little virtual applause online.
We also want to thank Cultuurlokaal Digital for making this event series possible. And of course, a big thank you to all of you joining on the other side of the screen. Also an invitation to visit foam.org/explore to stay up to date of all the things happening over there. For our next event in the series, we'll finish the sentence photography is ... with the word text. This event will take place on Wednesday evening, 13th of November. Speakers for this event will be published soon, so keep an eye out on our socials.
And before we wrap up, we want to actually invite you all to join us on our Miro board, where we've been collecting different resources related to tonight's topic. And we'd love for you to answer the question that we pose, which is photography is ... and we'd like for you to finish that sentence. You'll also find Razan's film Canada Park there, as well as links to No Man's Land for you to contribute and also take part in that project. So please feel free to join us there, add your thoughts and things that you took away from tonight's discussions. And so we're going to close the stream off now, and we'll be continuing in Miro for a little bit longer. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.